at the forefront of ensuring global equitable access to vaccines, especially to developing countries, and the G7 as a whole are major producers of vaccines. The EU is the largest exporter of COVID-19 vaccines to the world. So far, we have exported more than 270 million doses, and we are top contributor to the COVAX facility with over 2.8 billion euros. We will donate at least 100 million doses by the end of the year. We must also strengthen manufacturing capacities around the world, and so we'll invest 1 billion euros to boost vaccine production in Africa. We are also ready to work in Latin America and to develop projects in this part of the world. The question of intellectual property rights will likely be raised in this context. A patent waiver might sound good, but it's no silver bullet. The TRIPS agreement already offers flexibility, and we want to focus on concrete proposals such as promoting voluntary licensing and knowledge transfers and patent pooling on mutually agreed terms. G7 leaders will also discuss how best to prepare for future pandemic, building on the Rome Declaration. And this idea of a treaty is now supported by more than 60 countries. The World Health Assembly has just decided 2 weeks ago to start examining such a treaty. It has taken the unprecedented decision to convene a special World Health Assembly in November to legally decide on the launch on formal negotiations. Second important topic, foreign policy. The G7, together with 4 guest countries, Australia, India, South Africa and South Korea, will reaffirm our belief in open societies, multilateralism and democratic values. These values underpin the actions we take, the policies we develop and the partnerships we build. In this context, Russia will be one of the main topics. G7 partners share similar views on Russia's disruptive activities. The EU condemns illegal, provocative and disruptive Russian activities against the EU, its member states and beyond. I stressed this to President Putin in a phone call this week. On the conflict in the eastern Ukraine, I will repeat that we do not see Russia as a mediator, but as a party to the conflict. We do not and will not recognize Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea. At last month's European Council, EU leaders took rapid action against the authorities in Belarus for the forced landing of a flight. This was an attack on democracy, the media and freedom of speech, but also civilian aviation safety. And this robust action has set the tone for the international response to this incident. We once again call on the Belarus authorities to immediately release Raman Pratasevich and Sofia Sapega and all political prisoners. At the summit, we will, of course, also discuss our complex relationship with China. The EU's approach is clear. China is a partner, a competitor and a potential systemic rival. We must strike the right balance for our best interests between engagement and standing firmly by our values. We have to work with China to address global challenges like climate change or regional issues like Afghanistan or the Iran nuclear deals. And economic relations with China are important for economic recovery. At the same time, we will defend ourselves against practices that pose security risks, distort the level playing field, or are incompatible with our values. We will continue to stand up to defend human rights and the rule of law in Xinjiang, Hong Kong and elsewhere. La promotion de nos valeurs
Promoting our
fondamentales,
fundamental values
c'est ce que nous voulons faire
defending human
aussi
rights
quand nous
is what we
sommes
wish to
engagés,
do
par exemple,
when we are
dans
committed,
la
for
Corne de l'Afrique,
example,
spécialement
in the
en
Horn of
Éthiopie.
Africa and especially
Nous
in
dénonçons
Ethiopia.
des violations extrêmement graves des droits humains et nous faisons appel à la mobilisation pour donner des accès humanitaires. Nous soutenons la demande pour des enquêtes internationales afin de qualifier les éléments graves de violations auxquelles nous sommes confrontés sur le terrain et de donner les conséquences que méritent ces événements. Un mot maintenant sur la question du financement du développement et spécialement la relation avec le continent africain. Nous appelons à la mise en place d'une nouvelle alliance avec le continent africain, une forme de plan Marshall pour l'Afrique. C'est le sens d'un appel que nous avons soutenu pour mobiliser à la fois le débat en lien avec les remises et les restructurations de dette. Premier point, pour générer une capacité de financement. Deuxième élément, pour poursuivre le débat sur les droits de tirage spéciaux dans le cadre du Fonds monétaire international. Nous avons été plusieurs à exprimer l'objectif de 100 milliards qui doivent pouvoir être réalloués vers le continent africain, mais également être engagés pour supporter les efforts afin de renforcer la gouvernance et de veiller à ce que la mobilisation des ressources bénéfiques soit plus forte au service de projets de développement économique et au service de projets de cohésion sociale vers le continent africain. Quelques mots rapidement sur l'engagement climatique. Vous savez que c'est au cœur des priorités de l'Union européenne. Vous savez aussi que nous avons été constants, tenaces, déterminés pour tenir en haut de l'agenda international ce sujet, la neutralité climat à l'horizon 2050, le renforcement de nos objectifs à l'horizon 2030 et considérer cet engagement climatique comme un levier pour plus d'innovation, pour plus de prospérité et pour garantir le respect pour notre planète. La biodiversité est un sujet pour lequel nous sommes également engagés. Nous aurons l'occasion d'aborder cette importante question. En conclusion, vous l'avez compris, il y a 3 points clés à nos yeux pour ce sommet. Le premier, c'est l'affirmation de nos valeurs démocratiques, de l'état de droit, c'est l'affirmation de l'ambition des États démocratiques d'agir et pas simplement de réagir, d'agir pour promouvoir nos valeurs. Le deuxième élément, c'est travailler ensemble sur le terrain de la prospérité, de la fiscalité internationale, l'impôt des sociétés, les progrès qui sont réalisés après cette réunion des ministres des Finances du G7, la question du level playing field, la question d'un prix carbone sont autant de thèmes qui devront être débattus. Et le troisième point, c'est travailler avec nos partenaires de façon intelligente, de façon positive et constructive pour garantir de la stabilité, pour réduire les risques de conflit, pour prévenir mieux les menaces et lorsque nous sommes confrontés à des conflits, pour tenter de trouver des solutions durables et les plus inclusives possibles. Voilà quelques éléments qui forment le cadre de la manière avec laquelle nous allons engager les travaux dans le cadre de cette première réunion du G7 à laquelle nous allons participer de manière physique.
Madam President, you have the floor.
Indeed, we are very much looking forward to have this G7 again, finally, to have the G7 countries, like-minded countries that share the same values, that share the same interest and that share also the same world view. So it's good that the US are back, and it's good that the G7 by this is back again too. We have a very broad agenda. These 3 days are really packed. So I want to focus on some of the topics, the economic impact of the crisis. We'll look at that. We will, of course, also look at the international environment, the rules-based system. We'll look at the education, the global education status, health, of course, and climate. So on the economy, at the beginning we will discuss as G7 how the state of play is and how we view the progress in our economies and what the best approach could be. And we haven't forgotten, you all remember a year ago, how threatening this health crisis was and still is for our economies. I mean, it had the potential to turn into a massive economic crisis. Interestingly, if we look at the European Union, we tackled the economic fallout from the pandemic, from this crisis, much better than, for example, compared to the last big crisis, the financial crisis in 2008. And why was this the case? It was the case because the European Union, after the last big crisis, drew the necessary conclusions from this crisis and developed effective tools. So when this pandemic and this economic crisis hit, we were able to establish very fast a diagnosis of the economic fallout. We came very fast to a consensus on the necessary remedial action, and then we could act forcefully on all fronts. If you look at the member states, we enabled the member states to act swiftly, for example, through the general escape clause, through the temporary state aid framework, and the complete flexibilization of the EU budget. And we enabled the European level to act forcefully and swiftly, at the beginning with SURE and now with Next Generation EU. And we will have a look at the G7 overall. Interestingly, if you take together the whole financial fiscal support in the European Union, if you look at the plans of what has been done in 2020, 21 and 22, there is an amount to fiscal support equivalent to 18% of GDP in Europe. And this is completely on par with the United States. If you look at the plans of the United States, that sum up to 20% of GDP fiscal support in 2020, 21 and 22. We will certainly discuss that topic. The second important factor why we come back better is that when the crisis hit, the European Union had just put in place its plans concerning our priorities, the European Green Deal, the digitization and resilience. And the crisis proved us right in the priorities we had set. Thus, our spending goes into investment for green and digital transition and into resilience. And the plan was there, the roadmap was there, and we could immediately act. But of course, we are also open economies, so our prosperity therefore will depend on our partners' response to the crisis. So I'm very much looking forward to the G7 confirming that there will be continued parallelism of our approaches, and particular in maintaining fiscal support. Now to the second topic, of course the G7 will also look at the risks and threats to the recovery by the international environment we have. And here 2 points stand out. First of all, the economic resilience. Domestically, there too, we have developed over the past month our tools to guard ourselves against risks. So to defend an open society, to have economic exchange, but not at any costs. For example, if you look at our tool of the 5G toolbox or the dual-use exports controls, but also the FDI screening we have now in place, our proposal to block distortive foreign subsidies. And the second topic, of course, will be that we will guard the respect for our values. We want cooperation, we want a lively exchange, but on the basis of democratic values and on the basis of fundamental rights. And for that too, we have developed over the last month our tools, for example, the Global Human Rights Sanctions Regime, or our forthcoming proposal for an anti-coercion instrument, and of course the whole tool set of human-centric approach to the digital world. You know it, it's the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, and the regulation on AI that is human-centered. We know that China and Russia are particular sources of concern in those areas, and therefore the G7 are finally again united and determined to protect and to promote our values. The next topic we will look at is the best way to defend our values and to promote our values, and that is to reinforce a strong and rules-based multilateralism. And with the return of the United States to a global arena, we are very much looking forward to the G7 backing effective action to strengthen multilateralism. We need effective WTO rules making, including a G7 commitment to help reform the WTO and the entire rules-based system. And we also need to strengthen our G7 partnership with developing countries, for example, on connectivity, as we have already agreed, for example, with Japan and India. Here, too, coordination with G7 partners can help to maximize the benefits of our investments from an economic, but also sustainability and political point of view. But even more important than the investments in infrastructure, they are important, but more important are also the investments in people. And here, let me have a look at the G7's emphasis on education for development. COVID has led to one of the worst education crises in history for children around the world. And we know that especially girls and young women are at risk because of the pandemic. Around 11 million girls from pre-primary to secondary school are at risk of not returning to school, with all the consequences behind that for their lives. And this is a bitter legacy of COVID, and we must join forces to secure the perspectives of young girls and women. And therefore, the European Union strongly subscribes to the objective of 40 million more girls in schools by 2026. And 20 million more girls reading by age 10 or end of primary school. And for that, we need sustainable financing. We have for that the Global Partnership for Education, and this should be underpinned by, as I said, sustainable financing. So I am glad to announce that the European Commission will increase its contribution by 32%. Last MFF, we contributed €68 million per year. That was over the period of 7 years, then 475 million. Now we will raise this contribution to 100 million per year. That is an overall of 700 million euro over the period of 7 years, our MFF. But we will also not forget the most urgent of necessity, and that is the fight against hunger. Here as well, the European Commission will step up to the plate by providing 250 million euro of new humanitarian funding targeting acute food insecurity in the Sahel, East Africa, Central African Republic, Sudan and Ethiopia. Turning towards the topic of health. We do subscribe the G7 aim to end the pandemic by 2022 by stepping up the global vaccination. The European Union has from the beginning contributed massively to this. You know the figures. Since vaccines became available, the European Union has acted. Not only that we at the very beginning with the friends created ACT Accelerator and COVAX, but we pledged heavily for it. But we also have from the beginning ensured that the domestic vaccination goes hand in hand with exports to the rest of the world. And we have good news. Today in Europe, more than 50% of the adult population have received at least one shot. And even better, today 100 million Europeans are fully vaccinated. We achieved that whilst never stopping export. From the 700 million doses that have been produced in the European Union since last December, roughly 350 million doses have been exported to over 90 countries. And a few weeks ago, I invited others to also participate and practice openness, and I'm very glad to see that the draft communiqué reflects this now, and it is very encouraging to listen to the potential announcements of the United States. Beyond 2022, it is not just about sharing vaccines, but it will be also about developing manufacturing capacity in Africa. You know that Team Europe announced indeed 1 billion of support to develop manufacturing capacity in Africa. Here is important not only to bring the mRNA technology for vaccines against COVID, to Africa, but also to bring this technology to Africa because it is very promising for other infectious disease, for example, like tuberculosis or, for example, malaria. So there's an enormous good case to make sure that there are different manufacturing hubs being developed in different regions of Africa. Finally, on climate, we committed to limit temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. I welcome that the G7 are also aiming in this direction, but I want to be very clear. Even a world that is just 1.5 degrees Celsius warmer than today will be much worse than today. And therefore, adaptation policies must be a central element of our climate policies in the European Union, but also, of course, with our partner countries. We acknowledge their specific needs. And in fact, the European Union already spends about half of its development finance on projects that support at the same time development and adaptation to climate change. But on top of this, as you know, we have this climate financing. So we support the G7 objective of $100 billion per year on climate financing. Team Europe has consistently contributed $25 billion over the last 3 years, and we will come up with a renewed commitment for Glasgow COP26 on that topic too. That was a lot. Thanks for your patience.
The Northern Ireland Protocol will no doubt be one of the subjects of conversation here. Madam President, what will you say to Boris Johnson on this subject? And while the EU has been very critical of what the UK is doing, can you honestly say that you are keeping your promise to cause the minimum possible disruption to the people of Northern Ireland?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The European Union is determined to make the protocol work for the benefit of everyone in Northern Ireland. And we have bent over backwards for years to find a solution on that. We agreed with the United Kingdom that the protocol was the only solution ensuring the absence of a hard border of Northern Ireland. We've been really debating that since years, and we found the one and only solution. Now, we have a treaty on that, the withdrawal agreement. It has been signed by both sides, pacta sunt servanda. It is important that we now implement the protocol. We have shown flexibility, we will show flexibility, but the protocol and the withdrawal agreement has to be implemented completely. And these are often technical things that have to be done, for example, build up the necessary infrastructure or give the European Union the access to the IT as was agreed. That is important. So we still see fundamental gaps in the implementation of the protocol, and unilateral measures de-applying some provisions of the protocol. We will discuss that in a trilateral meeting in Cornwall together. We are determined to do everything to keep peace and stability on the island of Ireland. It is important that there is deep respect for the protocol, that we protect it, and for that we have the withdrawal agreement. It's a good agreement. All sides signed this agreement. Now it has to be implemented.
Next question is for John Chalmers, actually, from Reuters here in Brussels. John.
Yes, good morning, John Chalmers from Reuters. Thank you for the opportunity to ask a question. I'll keep it on the same subject. For the President of the European Council, what will your message be in Cornwall to Prime Minister Johnson on the question of the Northern Ireland Protocol impasse? And do you agree with the US President, Joe Biden, that the UK's approach to the issue is imperiling peace in Northern Ireland? And if I could just add a question, if I may, for the President of the Commission. Vice President Šefčovič spoke of consequences for the UK if it continues on its current path. What might these be, and could they include tariffs and quotas? Thank you.
First point, I would like to fully confirm what has been said by Ursula. We are exactly on the same page and will give exactly the same message. I would like also to insist on the fact that member states in Europe, they are expressing more and more worries about the current situation, because indeed it's fundamental, it's paramount to implement what we have decided. This is a question of rule of law, which is an important value that we share in common. And the Good Friday Agreement is, of course, a priority. We want to make sure that this Good Friday Agreement will be fully implemented, and it's very important for the European Union to implement what we have decided, to be a loyal partner, but at the same time, we will use all the tools we have in order to make sure that we defend our interests, that we protect the integrity of the single market, and that we guarantee the level playing field.
Yes, to answer your question, the good part about an agreement, a signed treaty, is that both sides signed up to also a dispute settlement mechanism and to remedial measures that can be taken. So there are no unilateral actions, but there is an agreed dispute settlement mechanism with different steps in our TCA and for the withdrawal agreement. And therefore, it is possible. I'm deeply convinced that the UK can work on implementing the withdrawal agreement, but if not, it is possible to move forward with within the agreed frame to have remedial measures and a dispute settlement mechanism. The situation, we should not forget, came because of Brexit, and we all agree that we do everything that there will be no hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. But we also have to protect the single market. The UK is a third country outside the single market, and therefore with the withdrawal agreement and its mechanism, we were able to square the circle by making sure there is no hard border, but we still will have, in a different manner, controls about goods coming from a third country, from the UK, to the single market. And this agreement has now to be put in place. It's about implementing what has been agreed. Once again, often the devil is in the detail. So therefore we showed and we will show flexibility on specific topics, but the overall frame is set and it has to be implemented now.
Thank you. Next topic, I believe, is coming from the South China Morning Post, Finbar, Birmingham. Finbar, can you hear us?
I can. Good morning. Thank you for your time. My question is about the reports that the European Union will join calls for an investigation into the origins of the coronavirus. Can the Presidents confirm whether this is the case, whether this has been relayed or will be relayed directly to China, and what sort of reaction you're hoping to get from Beijing if you're joining the chorus for this? Thank you very much.
We are very clear. We think that we need full transparency in order to learn the lessons, and that's why we support all the efforts in order to make the clarity. The world has the right to know exactly what happened in order to be able to learn the lessons, and indeed we will support all the efforts in order to make the transparency and to know the truth.
I can only underline that it is of utmost importance that we learn about the origin of the coronavirus. For the introduction, I've been speaking about the lessons learned of the European Union, or the lessons drawn from the experience of the financial crisis. And out of this experience, we did a good analysis and then we developed tools. So today, in the health crisis, we were faster. The same has to happen here. There is this horrible pandemic, a global pandemic. We have to know where it did come from in order to draw the right lessons and to develop the right tools to make sure that this will never happen again. And therefore, the investigators need complete access to whatever is necessary to really find the source of this pandemic. And depending on that, we have to draw conclusions. And there's a wide scope of different options that are being investigated right now. Therefore, it shows it's important that we pin down to the one picture that is there for the start of the pandemic. Because for that, the investigation teams really need access to the information and to the sites.
Next question is for Vince Chadwick from DevEx. Vince, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks, Baron. For President von der Leyen, I wanted to ask about Ethiopia. You have frozen the budget support from the Commission, but the EU member states have not. And I wanted to ask whether that doesn't undermine your position on this conflict, and in particular what your plans are for the 2021-2027 programming period, which is currently being considered. And for President Michel on Ethiopia again, you said that you will look into the consequences that these actions deserve when it comes to the Tigray conflict. What are those consequences that you're considering, please? Thank you.
The situation is really, really concerning in Ethiopia and Tigray, and therefore it is important to act and to give a wake-up call to all stakeholders that we really have to focus on that region to prevent the worst. So what is going on there is so worrisome that it was for the European Commission important not to go on with the normal procedures, but really flag and mark that we have to stand up, that we have to care, and that we have to be there and present to prevent a worsening of an already very, very difficult and concerning situation.
La situation en Éthiopie est extrêmement grave. Depuis le début du conflit, l'Union européenne, par la voix du haut représentant, a été extrêmement ferme et extrêmement claire sur le sujet. Premier élément, nous appelons avec la plus grande force à ce que les troupes érythréennes quittent l'Éthiopie. On ne peut pas transiger par rapport à cela. C'est un premier point et c'est un appel qui est exprimé aussi par l'ensemble des chefs d'État dans la région. C'est un premier point. Deux, nous appelons à ce qu'il y ait des accès humanitaires qui soient instaurés parce qu'il y a une catastrophe humanitaire qui se joue sur ce terrain et il y a des allégations extrêmement graves de violation des droits humains. C'est pour laquelle nous soutenons la nécessité d'enquêtes, peut-être même des enquêtes internationales, afin de qualifier les faits qui semblent extrêmement graves. Et effectivement, en fonction de la situation et de la qualification des faits, peut-être que des conséquences doivent être tirées avec la nécessité de lutter contre toute forme d'impunité. Ce sont des violences graves. La communauté internationale ne peut pas baisser les yeux, ne peut pas fermer les yeux. Ce point sera abordé dans le cadre du G7 et je vais tenter avec les collègues du G7 de faire en sorte que l'on puisse renforcer l'approche coordonnée pour avoir un impact afin de faire cesser ces violences graves qui sont y compris des violences ethniques avec des violations extrêmement dramatiques des droits humains.
I'll take a last question from Sam Fleming from the Financial Times. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks very much indeed for taking my question. The question's on corporate tax. The G7 accord amongst finance ministers involves the withdrawal of unilateral measures and DSTs. I wondered, does that mean if there is an OECD deal, will the EU plan to withdraw its planned EU digital levy, or do you see the digital levy as compatible with an OECD accord on Pillar 1 and Pillar 2? And an associated question, clearly there are concerns among EU member states about this. We're hearing from Hungary, Poland and Ireland amongst them. Do you see a realistic chance of Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 being implemented in the European Union without any enabling directives being ultimately vetoed? And the question is to both presidents. Thank you.
Sur la question de la fiscalité des entreprises, d'abord, il est bon de noter que l'Union européenne a été à l'avant-garde de ce débat politique. Depuis de nombreuses années, nous portons au Parlement européen, dans des débats réguliers, au niveau du Conseil, cette nécessité d'aller vers davantage d'harmonisation sur le terrain de la fiscalité internationale. Le deuxième point, vous le connaissez, vous l'avez mentionné, la fiscalité des entreprises est d'abord une compétence nationale. Au plan juridique, c'est une compétence nationale. Il y a ce mouvement d'harmonisation que nous voulons soutenir autant que possible. Et le message important, il est donné dans le cadre du G7 parce qu'il a un impact politique. Mais ça ne veut pas dire que ce message donné au départ du G7 résout l'ensemble des questions qui vont être posées. Et en termes de fiscalité aussi, le diable peut-être dans les détails. Il est certain que nous allons continuer au niveau européen, dans le cadre institutionnel européen, avec le respect pour l'état de droit européen, pour travailler, pour faire progresser cette harmonisation qui nous semble nécessaire. Par ailleurs, il y a un lien avec un débat important que nous avons vu l'année passée, au moment de la décision qui touche au fonds de relance et la question des ressources propres de l'Union européenne, puisque certains de son sujet, de ces sujets sont connectés avec le débat sur les ressources propres de l'Union européenne. Mais certainement, ne rougissons pas du travail politique qui a été mené par l'Union européenne les dernières années. Nous avons été nombreux à appeler à ce qu'il y ait davantage de coopération en direction de davantage d'harmonisation dans toutes les instances de l'Union européenne, OCDE et aussi dans le cadre du G7 ou dans le cadre du G20. Et certainement, ce week-end, on aura l'occasion d'aller de l'avant. Sur la question des décisions qui ont été prises sur le plan national par certains États dans le monde, y compris par certains États membres, il appartiendra aux États concernés d'apprécier leur position en fonction de la dynamique des débats sur ce sujet.
So indeed, we welcome the results of the G7 finance minister concerning a minimum tax. It is very positive, this step forward. But of course we know that now it has to be brought to G20 and OECD and progress must be supported. What your question is concerned on the digital levy and the proposal to have the 100 most wealthy companies or most successful companies with a specific levy, those two are not conflicting, they are more complementary. Because in the development of our digital levy, we're making sure that this is non-discriminatory and that there will be no double taxation. And we are in very close contact with relevant stakeholders. This will certainly also be a topic we will discuss at our EU-US summit. So it is important to move forward. It is important we support very much the proposal that is on the table. And as I said, we make sure that our digital levy is non-discriminatory and moves forward too. We will see in the very end if there is a broader solution in a large context like the OECD countries. It's always our favorite.
Thank you, Madam President. And Mr. President, we'll have an EU coordination meeting tomorrow, or the day after actually, on Friday, because it starts at 3 p.m. local time. So we'll keep you updated on our webpage as well. Thank you for joining us this morning and see you soon.